The last day of death row. Inmate Mark Dean Schwab. Florida's most controversial execution. Hello, friends, and welcome back. Tonight, we revisit one of Florida's most haunting true crime stories, a case that gripped the nation for over a decade. Mark Dean Schwab was not just another name on death row. He was a man whose disturbing actions shattered an entire community and whose legal battle became a high-profile fight over the state's execution methods. For nearly 16 years, Schwab lived under the shadow of his sentence, filing appeal after appeal in a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. But as the clock wound down, the reality of his fate became impossible to escape. In his final 24 hours, Schwab's behavior revealed a mixture of defiance, resignation, and unexpected moments of calm, leaving witnesses with an unsettling glimpse into the mind of a condemned man. Tonight, we take you inside those last hours, step by step, to uncover how it all came to an end. Dear friends, our story tonight begins long before Mark Dean Schwab found himself on Florida's death row. Schwab's troubled journey began in the mid-1990s when he committed a crime so deeply disturbing that it would leave a lasting scar on an entire community in Brevard County, Florida. The details of that crime are not something we will linger on, but it's important to understand that it was this act that set in motion more than a decade of legal battles, public outrage, and emotional appeals from the victim's family. After his arrest and trial, Schwab was sentenced to death, a decision that the state's courts and juries agreed upon multiple times over the years. But his path to execution was anything but straightforward. For over 16 years, Schwab fought against the sentence, filing appeals at the state and federal levels. His legal team argued not only for his life, but also against Florida's lethal injection procedures, which had come under scrutiny after a botched execution in 2006, left the condemned prisoner visibly struggling for over 30 minutes. That case became a rallying point for death penalty opponents, and Schwab's name became intertwined with the larger debate over whether Florida's methods met constitutional standards. By 2007, the Florida Supreme Court had reviewed his case again and upheld his sentence, clearing the way for an execution date to be set. Schwab's lawyers then filed emergency motions, citing the Eighth Amendment's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. These filings were closely watched because Florida had temporarily suspended executions following the 2006 incident and had since revised its lethal injection protocols. Schwab became the first inmate scheduled for execution under the new procedures, meaning his case was not just about his crime, but about testing the state's updated execution system in a highly public way. As the date approached, media coverage intensified. News crews gathered outside Florida State Prison, and public opinion was divided. For some, Schwab's execution represented long overdue justice. For others, it was a troubling moment, given the lingering questions over lethal injection. The family of the victim, who had endured years of delays, spoke openly about their hope for closure. Meanwhile, Schwab himself remained an active participant in his legal defense, speaking with his attorneys daily in the final weeks. The last 24 hours of Schwab's life began quietly on the morning before his scheduled execution. According to prison officials, he woke early and followed his usual routine. He spent time reading in his cell, exchanged brief words with correctional staff, and met with his spiritual advisor. Witnesses later noted that Schwab seemed calm, almost eerily so, as if the years of waiting had drained away the fear of the moment. But there were signs of tension, small, restless movements, a tightened jaw, and the occasional deep sigh. Throughout the day, he received visits from his attorneys, who made final legal filings in a last-ditch effort to halt the execution. Those appeals reached the U.S. Supreme Court, but late in the afternoon, the justices declined to intervene. Schwab was officially out of legal options. When informed of the decision, he reportedly nodded and said little, returning to his cell in silence. That evening, Schwab was offered a final meal. He chose a relatively simple one, a fried chicken dinner with side dishes, dessert, and a soda. Prison records show that he ate most of it, leaving only a few bites untouched. Afterward, he made several phone calls to family members. One of these calls lasted nearly an hour, during which he expressed regret, shared memories, and said goodbye. Those who spoke with him said his tone was steady, though occasionally his voice caught with emotion. In the late-night hours, Schwab was moved to a holding cell closer to the execution chamber. Here, he was under constant observation. He spent much of this time lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, and occasionally speaking softly with the guards. Some officers later said that his composure was striking. He neither broke down nor lashed out. Around 5 a.m., he was given the option of a shower and clean clothes, which he accepted. He dressed in standard prison whites and waited. As dawn broke, witnesses began arriving at the prison. Journalists, officials, and a small group of family members from both sides of the case. Outside the gates, a mix of protesters and death penalty supporters gathered, holding signs and speaking to news crews. The tension in the air was palpable. By mid-morning, prison staff entered Schwab's holding cell to begin the formal process. His hands and ankles were secured, and he was escorted down the hallway to the execution chamber. Inside, he was guided onto the gurney, and IV lines were inserted into his arms. The witnesses took their seats behind a pane of glass, and the warden read the death warrant aloud. When asked if he had any final words, Schwab spoke briefly. His statement was not long, but it carried weight. He acknowledged the pain caused by his actions and expressed remorse. He also thanked his attorneys and spiritual advisor for their support over the years. Those present described his voice as firm but quiet. At the warden's signal, the execution began. The first drug was administered, designed to render Schwab unconscious. Witnesses observed his breathing slow, his eyes close, and his body relax. The second and third drugs followed, completing the process. Within minutes, the warden announced the time of death. It was just after 6 p.m. In the aftermath, reactions were swift. The victim's family spoke to reporters, saying they finally felt a measure of peace, though no execution could erase their loss. Opponents of the death penalty used the moment to question Florida's execution methods, while state officials pointed to the smooth process as proof that the revised protocol worked as intended. For the prison staff who witnessed the day's events, it was another reminder of the heavy responsibility that comes with carrying out a court sentence. For those who had followed Schwab's case for years, it marked the end of a long, emotionally charged chapter in Florida's criminal justice history. Schwab's final 24 hours were a mix of quiet routine and intense scrutiny, ending not with chaos or controversy, but with the measured, deliberate conclusion of a case that had stirred debate far beyond the walls of Florida State Prison. His story remains one of the most notable examples of how a single death penalty case can shape and be shaped by larger questions about justice, procedure, and the human capacity for acceptance in the face of an unchangeable fate. In the end, the final hours of Mark Dean Schwab were not just the close of a long legal battle, they were a reflection of the deep divisions surrounding capital punishment in America. For over 16 years, his case had been a touchpoint in debates about justice, punishment, and the methods by which a state carries out its most severe sentence. On that day in Florida, the law took its course, bringing a measure of closure to some and raising enduring questions for others. Outside the prison, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind only the memory of what had unfolded. For the victim's family, it marked the end of a chapter filled with grief and waiting. For Schwab, it was the final page of a story that began decades earlier, a reminder that behind every headline, there is a trail of lives forever changed by a single, irreversible act.